You are listening to Church Talk with Isaac.
Hello, everyone. What's going on? This is Isaac again. I want to welcome you to another episode here. And I actually want to come on and I wanted to give you all some extra material. I had some good feedback on the last episode that I did dealing with the Apostolic Church and whether or not what people call apostolic is really apostolic or whether it's charismatic. And I want to actually talk about some of the differences between apostolic churches, apostolic people, and prophetic churches and prophetic people. Are they the same? Because sometimes what we do is what I've heard people do is use those terms interchangeably, where they'd say this is an apostolic and prophetic house, or this is an apostolic and prophetic leader, an apostolic and prophetic person. These are apostolic and prophetic people. And but the thing is, if you can say that they're apostolic and prophetic, then there has to be some differences between the two. So what I've come to realize is that many churches, many leaders, many people who say that they're apostolic and prophetic, they may be more one than the other. They may be more of a prophetic person, church leader, than they are an apostolic church leader or person. And quite honestly, when there's no definition that's in place, it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two because the lines begin to get blurred. Now, what I want to do, this will probably be more of a teaching moment. And again, this is a bonus episode, so that's absolutely fine. But what I want to do is kind of lay some foundation as far as how I believe the church was organized by Jesus. And then I'll go into what I believe the two differences are. All right. So for one, I believe that when Jesus built his church, remember the first thing that he did was he called 12 men to himself. Out of the disciples or the followers that he had, and out of those 12 men, he said, I'm gonna call you apostles. Scripture say he went away to pray. He came back and he named them the 12 apostles. So what we see is that Jesus placed his mandate, his vision, his assignment. He gave access to the totality of his life experience, ministerial experience, to 12 apostles. And he told Peter, he said, on this rock, I'll build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And he said, you shall no longer be called Simon, you shall be called Peter. And I believe that what Jesus was doing was he was giving the church, he was laying the foundation of the church, that foundation being who Jesus is, a revelation that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. But he's giving that revelation to lay a foundation to 12 men. He gave that foundation just not to 12 men, but he gave that foundation to 12 apostles. I believe that the church, before anything else, should be apostolic. And if you remember, if you haven't heard the previous episode that I actually released earlier this week, the episode I actually defined what I believe apostolic means. When people use the term apostolic, I gave a definition of what I believe that actually means. And what I actually said was that when people define what an apostle is or what an apostolic church is, I believe that they are people, an apostle or an apostolic church are called to release heaven's influence upon a region and upon a people. Let me say that again. I said, I believe that if you are an apostle or if you are an apostolic church, you are a people who are called to release the influence of heaven upon a region and upon a people. So what Jesus did was he gave the church to these 12 men. These men became the foundation. I want you all to pay attention. In the Old Testament, they didn't have a apostles in the Old Testament. The primary leaders in the Old Testament underneath the Old Covenant were prophets. They were prophets. So God's people relied on the voice of the prophet, relied on the leading of the prophet. But what we see Jesus did was he instituted was now he gave the foundation of his church, of his new covenant, to be laid upon a foundation that apostles will lay. In other words, the primary obligation and responsibility of the church is to release the culture, to release the influence of heaven into a region, and to release the influence of heaven, the influence of Jesus Christ into a people, where those people become conduits to carry out the same assignment that the apostles did to a degree, where they would release the influence of heaven upon a region, upon a sector of society, a sphere of influence, and upon a people. Out of that apostolic foundation, what we see is that when you look at the book of Acts onward, what you see is that out of that apostolic foundation, you see all of a sudden a prophet pop up. You see Agabus pop up. Then you see other prophets pop up. You see Judas, and you see Silas begin to pop up. Then you begin to see other teachers pop up. In Acts chapter 13, there were certain teachers and prophets. Now we see prophets and teachers. Then out of nowhere, we see an evangelist pop up out of this apostolic church, this foundation, where we see Philip the evangelist begins his evangelistic career. And then we see elders and we see pastors begin to pop up within the new covenant. But all of those other gifts, they popped up out of an apostolic foundation. So I believe that God's intention for the local church was it to primarily be apostolic. So even if you were a prophet, you had apostolic DNA. If you were a teacher, you had apostolic DNA. If you were an evangelist, if you were a pastor, you had apostolic DNA. You had that innate mandate within you. Even if your expression is different, you would still release the influence of heaven within a region, within a people, through your individual and customized expression, whether apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist. Through your expression, you would influence a nation, you would influence a region, influence a people through heaven's culture, heaven's influence. So sometimes I want to lay that foundation, because what began to happen, what I've seen in many churches, is people begin to adopt terminology like apostolic. People would say we're apostolic, but they're really not apostolic. You don't see that. You don't see that heavenly influence, that heavenly impact in their ministry. They may be a local church that's simply a pastoral church. That may be a primarily teaching church, a primarily prophetic church, but you don't really see that apostolic seedbed, that apostolic foundation, where their main concern is influencing a region or influencing people with heaven's influence. So what I want to talk about really briefly is the difference between apostolic ministry and prophetic ministry. I want to talk about very briefly some of the differences between a church that focuses on the apostolic versus a church that focuses on the prophetic, and kind of how you can see just through their expression, primary expressions, what some of the differences are. So let me say this. Prophetic churches that emphasize on the prophetic, primarily emphasize on the prophetic, primarily may be led by a prophet, may be led by someone who is more inclined to the prophetic ministry. Typically with these types of churches, what you see with prophetic churches is that by nature, they're concerned not necessarily with influencing people with heaven's influence through their life necessarily, but most prophetic churches and most prophetic people, what they do is they're more concerned with making people aware of what God is saying and what God is doing. So let me give you an example. If you're part of a prophetic church, and let's say you work at McDonald's, and in McDonald's, the expression of what you feel like you are accomplished in many cases, the height of your accomplishment as far as being a Christian or someone who's being authoritative or someone who's being a good servant of God, the height of your expression is that you're able to tell people, hey, this is what God told me, or hey, this is what God showed me. This is what God told me about you. This is what God showed me about you. And through that prophetic ministry, if the person's like, hey, that was right on the head. Thank you so much for that. I feel strengthened. I feel encouraged. I feel they may even give their life to God from it. That in many cases with primarily prophetic churches is the height of their satisfaction, to know that they were influential, that they were of someone who was used by God to relay what God was saying to them. And now that they release what God said to them, that person can now put to action whatever it is, the word that was given to them. And now it's up to them to carry that word, to bring it into manifestation. You did your job. You ministered the word of the Lord to them, and now that burden is released from you. And I want to say this, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's very important with prophetic ministers and prophetic ministry, to be able to express what God is saying, what God is doing. I talked about in an earlier podcast, I don't remember how many podcasts ago, how many episodes ago, but I talked about how the prophetic is speaking and expressing the heart, mind, and will of God. So if you do that, and if that's your dominant expression, I believe that that's a great expression. But it's different than an apostolic expression. And I'll say that. It's different from an apostolic expression. Prophetic churches by nature are concerned with making people aware of what God is saying, aware of what God is doing. But apostolic churches by nature are different. Apostolic churches by nature are concerned with transforming culture. They're more concerned with transforming culture through their influence than they are transforming culture simply through their words. They are more concerned with transforming culture through their influence, through heaven's influence upon their life. So in other words, when people encounter apostolic people, an apostolic leader, an apostolic church, a person who has an apostolic foundation, when someone encounters their life, they typically come into an experience with heaven, where they get a taste of heaven. When they encounter your life, they get a taste of heaven. When they encounter your life, they get a glimpse of Jesus's life. Typically with apostolic people, their influence is more about what they carry than what they say. And I'll say this, it's different with prophetic people, because what I've seen is I've seen people who prophesy extremely accurately, but their lives do not line up with what they say. I see people who, and this is the thing, like when you talk about trying those who say they are apostles, or trying those who say they are apostolic, one of the things that makes someone who is truly apostolic different than other is that you can see the fruit of their life through their lifestyle, because they don't just carry heaven's word, they carry heaven's culture. Their life exudes the culture, the manifestation of God's heart. Their lives do. So even if, let's take the same person, you're working at McDonald's and you come out of an apostolic foundation, just through your lifestyle, just through your conversation, just through your demeanor, simply through your temperament, simply through your tone, simply through how you serve, how you engage with the people around you, people are experiencing heaven, and people are experiencing a glimpse of who Jesus is, and oftentimes it's not even intentional. And all of a sudden, you see things around the organization begin to change simply because you were placed in that organization. And I'm just not talking about apostles. I'm talking about people who carry an apostolic culture on the inside of them, who come out of an apostolic foundation. So it's very different. I've seen people who are prophetic and they give the word of the Lord, but they're mean, they're selfish, It's a lot of different things. So I believe that what God wants to do is he wants to begin to merge the apostolic and the prophetic, like truly merge it, just not merge it in terminology, but truly merge the two cultures to where people are experiencing a glimpse of heaven and people are experiencing a taste of Jesus by your life, through your life, and things are changing and enculturation is beginning to happen where things are conforming to match the culture that you come from. And now the culture that you're sent to is starting to adjust to what God has mandated you to be, and you're able to speak and express the heart of God to where people are receiving the word of the Lord through the prophetic foundation, the prophetic culture that you come from, so that they can be edified, they can be strengthened, they can be comforted, they can be charged, they can be brought into alignment to what God is saying and what God is doing. So I believe that the two are very important. Listen, I just wanted to come on, y'all, because I love talking about this type of thing, and I believe that God is raising up true apostolic ministries. He's raising up true apostles who will partner with the other four ministry gifts, the prophet, the teacher, the evangelist, the pastor, and we'll begin to see the church that God intended to be in the earth. So listen, I love y'all. Thanks for rocking with me on this bonus episode. If you enjoy the content, do me a favor and go ahead and share this. Don't forget to leave a review. Don't forget to rate this episode, this podcast, especially on Apple. Don't forget to rate it because it helps to get the word out there. Listen, I love y'all. Y'all have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Church Talk with Isaac. If you enjoy our content and benefit from this podcast, do me a favor and subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends, family, and colleagues. I'm also on all social media platforms and would love to connect with you. You can also partner with us by visiting isaacwatsonministries.com and clicking donate. Your partnership helps us to get the message of Jesus through Isaac Watson Ministries to the world. Talk to you soon.